If you'd like to open up to Ephesians chapter 5, if you're using your Bible, Ephesians chapter 5. Kind of a shorter piece of Ephesians 5 this morning, but there's a lot there, so we'll work our way through. As Jet reminded us in class, we've talked a lot about walking over the course of this time. I won't run us through reading every verse this time, but I will remind us of where we have been because we're about to hit another one. First of all, we saw that we are to walk in good works. You'll remember in Ephesians 2:10, it talks about us being the workmanship of God and that we were designed for works that he has already prepared for us. And then in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 1, we are told to walk in a worthy manner. So we represent God here on earth. We represent his Son, and because of that, we should carry ourselves in a way that does that. Third, we looked in the middle of Ephesians chapter 4 that we should walk with purpose. And he talked there about the Gentiles and them walking in the futility of their minds. And for us, we're to walk in a different way. And so we should have purpose in how we walk and where we go and what we do. We talked in Ephesians chapter 5 at the beginning about walking in love and how love should kind of undergird all that we do. If you've been here in the Sunday morning auditorium class looking at the fruit of the Spirit, you saw love right at the beginning of that. Love is kind of the basis of who we are as Christians. And then midway through chapter 5, we were told that we were to walk as children of light. So as God's people, God's children, people with an inheritance, we represent the family. And so we should walk in a way where light is who we are and what we do. We're the light of the world, as Jesus said in Matthew 5. And so because of that, we are not to be walking in darkness, not to be undercover and hiding, but instead to be out there in the open for the world to see. And then this morning, we are to walk once again in Ephesians 5 and verse 15. It says, "Look carefully then as how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise." So we are to be people who are walking in wisdom. Now that probably looks a lot different to each of us of how we might define that. We'll see how Paul illustrates that here in a second. But we are to walk in wisdom. So we should be asking the right questions as we walk. We would, when I was in youth ministry days, a lot of times people would ask questions about where is the line? How far is too far? When does it become sin? All of those kinds of things. And I kept trying to redirect the question to what is the wise thing to do? Instead of how close to the edge can I get before I go too far, what is the wise thing to do? It seems like every year we have more stories of people who are daredevils who get a little too close to the edge and then lose their lives. We see a lot of stories of every year. I love Yellowstone National Park. There are stories of people at Yellowstone every year that either decide, you know, I'd like to get a better view of this geothermal thing that's like 300 degrees of water bubbling and get closer for a better picture or a better selfie, and they find themselves falling in and are killed because of it. Or, hey, that's a great looking buffalo over there. What if I were to go up and pet that buffalo and wonder why it doesn't turn out well for them as the buffalo charges them? And you see all these crazy stories, and it's kind of that mindset of how close can I get to the danger? How close can I get to what's wrong and it still be okay? What if we lived our marriage relationships this way? And Paul will talk about marriage relationships next in the story, and so we won't go too far there. But what if our whole marriage relationship was based on where is the line where I annoy them? Where is the line where they're upset by what I do? Where is the line where they're hurt by what I do? And so I'm going to live a married life getting as close to that as I can. What if, as kids or as parents, our line is, how close can I get before there is a punishment or before there is something that messes up the relationship? And I'm going to live as close to that edge as I can. And so what Paul says instead is we need to be walking as people who are wise, not as unwise, because a constant walking of getting as close as you can to the edge is unwise. I look at this step, which is harder to see with just wood, every Sunday, and I think to myself, I don't want to get too close to the edge of that. I'll lose my balance. It'll be the most memorable Sunday ever, and I'll go right into that table, and that would be no good. So we're walking as wise, but not as unwise. And so as we look again, he says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time because the days are evil. So then he talks about this wisdom, walking as wise instead of unwise, involves the use of our time. I think we have convinced ourselves that if we just had more time, everything would be fine. If we just had more time, we could get it all done. If we just had more time, all of those undone things that we are supposed to do would be done, and things would be better for us. Yesterday, Nathan came to me in the living room about 5 o'clock in the midst of watching a football game of some kind and said, "My oil needs to be changed." Now, I would like to tell you this is the first time Nathan has said to me, "My oil needs to be changed." It's not. He's mentioned that a couple times already. And every time it comes up, it's a bad time. Is your life like this, or is it just mine? Does someone ask you to do something, tell you there's a need for something, and every time it comes up, there's something else going on, something in your mind? Or, like yesterday, I already mentioned to you, I was several hours into Saturday with nothing to do when at 5 o'clock it was mentioned, we should change the oil. I thought, where were you 5 hours ago when I had nothing to do? And here we are. I show you that Time magazine at the beginning. If you came in late, you missed that. Go back and look at it online. From 1989, because I would ask you, what if in the last week you did not have a cell phone, you did not have the internet, you only had 3 channels on your television, you did not have all of the things that distract you today, would you have had more time last week to do whatever it is you think you should have been doing? I would think most of us probably would convince ourselves we did somehow have more time. Now, what it comes down to is, and I think what Paul will encourage us toward here is, it's not the amount of time you have. We all have the same amount of time. You look at people that do amazing things and create and invent and read more books than you read or whatever it may be, they have the same amount of hours, minutes, seconds in a day that you do. And they use it differently. And I will tell you, for me, it's the same thing. I will convince myself there is not time for whatever this is, but Paul will say to us, how are we making use of the time? So walking as wise begins with, how am I making use of my time? And if you, like me, know that you waste too much of it, then where am I wasting it? One of the things I read several years ago was if you have a smartphone, and most of you probably do at this point, if you have a smartphone and you take your phone out and you have ever caught yourself opening an app that was not the app you intended to open for the reason you took your phone out, you have just found your time waster. Because you automatically go to 1 or 2 every time. And I'm guilty of this too. I have a couple on here that the first thing I will hit, and then I'll realize that's not what I got my phone out for. I was going to check the weather. That's not what I got my phone out for. I was going to see if someone had texted or whatever. But instead, it's the time waster. How do we waste our time? If it's not the phone for you and you think, oh, those silly phone people, you have one too. You're not innocent. We all have some place where our time is going away from us. So Paul says this walk of wisdom begins with time. So the choice here is wise or unwise. Now, our world does not like an either-or choice. We want lots of options. If there were a restaurant here in Ado, we got done with our service, we went to lunch, and you went to a restaurant, and there were only 2 things on the menu, would you keep going there? Now, if we're going to be honest with each other, if the 2 things were really good, maybe. There was a place in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, the Dreamland Barbecue. Their menu has expanded now, but when they first opened, the menu was ribs and bread. That was the entire menu. And every time you went there, there was a line out the door because it was just those 2 things, but they were really good at it. Now, our world doesn't like that most of the time. We don't like the idea that Paul gives us here of we have to choose. We're going to walk as wise or we're going to walk as unwise. So that's where the choice begins. Then he says in verse 17, therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. So he expands the choices here. You now have, you have, in walking in wisdom, you can choose either foolishness or understanding. Now, if we had those laid before us, if someone was holding those 2 choices up in front of us, my guess is we would choose understanding every time. Unless you were just in a goofy mood that day, I don't know. But for the most part, I think we would prefer understanding over foolishness. But the way we live doesn't always show that, does it? Oftentimes the way we live, it seems like they're a whole lot more interested in foolishness than in understanding. Because if we don't understand, what are we doing to gain that? If we don't have an understanding of God, are we doing something to gain that, or are we leaning more towards foolishness? And then in verse 18, he says this, and it just seems to come out of nowhere, but it makes a lot of sense as we begin to unpack it. And do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit. So he talks about drunkenness all of a sudden out of nowhere here. And so he gives us this choice again of wine or the Spirit. It was everything within the preacher and me not to say the spirits or the Spirit. Wine or the Spirit. You can choose this thing that is a deadening thing, or you can choose this thing that is a stimulating thing that gives life. And if you look around our world today, if you don't buy into wise or foolish, I think you can begin to see it here, or foolishness or understanding, I think you can see it here. A lot of people choose wine over any number of other things. Now, before I let you off the hook again here, and you assume, well, this is not me, I don't deal, I'm a teetotaler or whatever, let me help you understand. There are a lot of things we will plug into this place. That we will say, this thing is the thing I'm going to take, and I'm going to put it in the place of the Spirit. Because if the Spirit were the thing we were putting forward, then everything that has been talked about in the Sunday morning auditorium class with the fruit of the Spirit would have been so apparent to all of us all the time, it would almost be redundant to talk about it. But we know it's a challenge. And so he gives this choice of wine or the Spirit. And then he uses this word debauchery, fun word. I like this one. We don't use this a lot, but this is basically what we're talking about here. If I can move, there we go. In the Greek lexicon, it defines debauchery as reckless abandon. And again, if wine is not the thing that does this for you, I think we probably have thought of reckless abandon in one way or another. How many times have you seen people throw themselves into something that is just meaningless and pointless and a waste of time? And it's always other people, by the way, not me, not you. But people throw themselves into things that are all of this with reckless abandon. They're not thinking of the consequences that go with it. If we look at the Greek word, sozo means to preserve. It is the A added to the front of this that brings us to debauchery. So it's the opposite of preserving, which is basically being wasteful. And we are, again, tying this back to time where he begins, how often are we wasteful of our time? And again, I am as guilty as anybody about this. I have a lot of time wasters in life that I wish I could shake. I have a lot of times where there is a thing I should be doing, and I will do lots of other things to stay busy instead of doing that thing. My wife likes to mock me because when I do the laundry in our house, and when we're getting ready to go on a trip, a lot of times I will wash towels somewhere in the process, and she will look at me and she will say, "We're not taking towels on the trip. Why are you wasting time washing towels right now?" And it's because somewhere in my head I think, I will have accomplished something, and when we come home there will be clean towels. Isn't that great? It's a waste of time. I'm being wasteful of what has been given to me. And so here he says, you're throwing into wine or you're throwing into the Spirit. You're throwing into something that is preserving, or you're throwing into something that is wasting. Which one are you going to choose? So Proverbs talks about wine in this way. And this, by the way, this is an aside within the midst of this. This is not the anti-wine sermon. If you're visiting, you've not shown up for that one. But there's an importance to this. Who has woe? Proverbs 23. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has strife? Who has complaining? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? And honestly, before you get to redness of eyes, maybe when you got up this morning, you're thinking, I do. I have all these things. All of this is going on in life. Those who tarry long over wine, those who go to try mixed wine, do not look at wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup and goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a serpent and stings like an adder. Your eyes will see strange things, and your heart utter perverse things. And again, plug any number of things in here where you see wine, because we look at it and we see all of the good about it, and all of the excitement about it, and all of the fun about it, and we don't see all of the consequence that comes with it. When I'm washing the towels, because it's something to accomplish and it's a busy thing that keeps me away from other things, it looks great in the process, but in the end, when I'm scrambling to get everything ready to go on the trip, I think, why did I wash the towels again? When people look at wine as this solution to the problem, not as a social thing, it's a solution. It is a way to deaden. It's a way to escape. What they're not seeing is the consequence of it all. You will be like the one who lies down in the midst of the sea, like one who lies on top of a mast. They struck me, you will say, but I was not hurt. They beat me, but I did not feel it. When shall I awake? I must have another drink. And so everything becomes about, I just need more. And we can have this as time, we can have this as any number of things, but we have convinced ourselves, I just need more of this instead of the Spirit. Because Paul's choice that he puts out before us, is it wine? Is it the things of this world? Is it wherever you may waste your time? Or is it the Spirit? Which one will you choose? Because wine, in this sense, and so many of those other things, they're about a loss of control. And even think of the way we term this in legal matters nowadays. If you are driving and you are drunk, we call that what? Driving under the influence. You are under the influence of something else. And so Paul says your choice here is, what are you going to be under the influence of? Is it wine? Is it the things of this world? Or is it instead the Spirit? So he says, do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit. So don't be filled with all these other things, be filled with the Spirit. And if we're filled with the Spirit to a point it's overflowing, there's really not room for all the rest. It is just the Spirit flowing out of us. As we've looked at several times in the Sunday morning class, the fruit of the Spirit, think of all these things that it is, but most of all, here it is self-control. Because when you choose the things of the world, it's a loss of control. Paul says when you choose instead the Spirit, it's self-control. Or as he says in 2 Timothy, God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love. And I think Jet had discipline this morning. Self-control is what the ESV says. Different Greek word, by the way, but translated the same way. So you have the spirit now of self-control instead of the things of this world. So you have the choice. Is it going to be a loss of control, or is it going to be self-control? Or maybe a choice of what you're going to be a slave to or who you're going to be a slave to. But your choice is pretty cut and dry. It's pretty simple. Am I going to do things that give up control to the things of the world? Or am I going to choose to live life in such a way that I am controlled by the Spirit and exercising self-control? Now, others are going to mock you and misunderstand you when you do this. If you choose, because of the wine part of this verse, just to not drink altogether because you don't want to figure out where that line is going to be, where suddenly it becomes drunkenness, people in this world will look at you like you are crazy. I moved here from Eugene, Oregon. There might have been 3 of us in Eugene, Oregon that didn't drink, sometimes it felt like. And when you were not taking of that, people looked at you like you were crazy. When you choose the Spirit over the things of the world, whatever they may be, not just wine, people look at you like you don't understand the ways of the world, how things should be. Think of the apostles in Acts. They're all speaking languages they don't know. People are hearing languages they don't know. And how is it described? How is it understood? In Acts 12 and verse 13, some are amazed, but also perplexed, saying to one another, what does this mean? But others, mocking, said they're filled with new wine. I don't know about you. I've run across inebriated people every now and then. I have not known them to speak languages they don't know, at least not ones that other people did know. That's not how it works. And yet these people see this and they think, oh, well, here, we'll just mock this and this is what it's all about. Or in 1 Peter 4, Peter says, with respect to this, they're surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery and they malign you. So the reactions you see out of people, they are perplexed and surprised by what you're doing. You ever feel that way, walking the Christian walk, walking in wisdom? People are perplexed by you and surprised by you. And so if they don't like it, how do they react? They mock and they malign. Just like in New Testament days. It's exactly the same. And so when you choose this, when you choose to walk in wisdom, it is very much the way of God. And yet the world around us, they don't know what to do with it. And so you are a goody two-shoes. You are, if you want to put it in school language, you are the teacher's pet. You think you're better than everyone else. Have you ever actually stopped and thought you were better than everyone else? Everyone assumes this of all Christians. I am very pleased to be forgiven by God. I rejoice in that. I don't spend a whole lot of time sitting thinking, I am so much better than everybody else. If anything, I'm reminded all the time just what a mess I am and where I mess up. For these people, they don't know what to do with it. And so this is how they react. And then notice the language that's used here. The flood of debauchery. I follow a storm chaser on Facebook because he has interesting videos that come up all the time. Every now and then he will encounter a flash flood. And I would see this dry riverbed, and he's sold it as a flash flood video, and then suddenly just all this water comes out of nowhere, and I think he's standing too close to that, and he gradually backs up a little bit and backs up a little bit. You can't stop that force. It just overtakes. And so Peter describes this as, once you get in the midst of this, it just it overtakes you. And we don't want to be overtaken by things, do we? We don't want to be completely out of control of something. Now contrast that with the language of Jesus. When Jesus describes the water of life, he describes it this way: whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him, that I will give him, will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. So you have the flood of debauchery, and then you have this spring of water. It's not overtaking, it's coming up within you and completely filling, as the Spirit does. And so another way we might word this is, do you want the flood or do you want a spring? Do you want, in walking in wisdom, to be overtaken by the stuff of the world, or do you want the power of the Spirit welling up within you and overflowing? And I don't know about you, but one of those sounds pretty good to me, and the other one sounds a little bit frightening to me. And we don't see all these things as we approach each topic, do we? We tend to see the good, like the Proverbs writer tells us. We see all of the exciting, the fun, and we miss out on all the consequence. And so Paul says, consider all of these things as are walking as wise, not as unwise. So what does walking in wisdom look like? I think that's how Paul closes this section. There are three things that you will see. We've been talking about the fruit of the Spirit. This is kind of the fruit of walking in wisdom. If people are walking in wisdom, this is what you will see in their lives, in our lives. First of all, in verse 19, he says, addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart. So first of all, walking in wisdom communicates truth in positive ways, especially singing. Now, I don't want to, this is also, if you're visiting today, it's not the anti-wine sermon. It's also not the pro-singing sermon, but this is an important point. If you don't like to sing, for whatever reason that may be, some of us can't carry a tune in a bucket. Some of us don't know the songs. Some of us like older songs or newer songs, whatever it may be. I will tell you, notice, by the way that last verse was worded, making melody in your heart, you are not called on for it to sound good. It's nice if it does. I like listening to people who know what they're doing as much as anybody else does. I went to a music thing over at ECU this past week, watched music majors sing and play their instruments and all that stuff, and I thought, these people are talented. This is kind of fun to watch. God's not looking for that when it comes to singing. He's okay with that. You can sing well, and that's fine. What God wants is you singing and making melody in your heart to Him. And so if you don't like to sing, I would encourage you, give that some thought. The people around you, they don't care what it sounds like. It's not that big of a deal. And honestly, some of the worst singers I have ever known in church life have been some of the most encouraging to me when it comes to getting this message of the, as Paul says it, hymns and psalms, the spiritual songs, the positive, encouraging message, to know that someone is willing to set aside whatever it feels like to sing in a way that's not good to our world and still sing to God. Oh, that message gets through loud and clear to me and to him. So we begin by communicating the truth in positive ways. Secondly, in verse 20, giving thanks always and for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. So first of all, we're singing, we're communicating well. Secondly, we are giving thanks regularly and giving thanks frequently. We have so many things in our lives to be thankful for. We create a holiday for it once a year, and we overeat and loosen our belts, but we're thankful. I will tell you, we have stuff every day to be thankful for. Whatever is going on in our lives, there is something there, someone there that God has blessed us with. And we're most thankful, I think, for the sacrifice that was made for us that we've already remembered this morning. And then third, in verse 21, he says, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. So we're communicating truth positively. We are thankful all the time. And then we are people who are selfless and humble. To walk in wisdom is to say, you know, there is something I would like or a way I would like it, but instead I'm going to be selfless and I'm going to be humble, and it's going to be okay. I was laughing this morning. We have a group of ladies down front here. Asked Clary what was up, if they were coming to keep me in line or what was going on. Somewhere along the way, I thought, did somebody sit in their seats back there? Because that's where they're usually at, right over there somewhere. They're all going out together afterwards. But isn't it interesting that if somebody sits in our seats, don't we immediately think, well, it's my seat. It's tradition. I sit there. If we like things a certain way, don't we immediately think, well, that's how I want it? And Paul says to us, we are selfless if we are walking in wisdom. And I don't know about you, but set aside wine and floods and springs and all that stuff, this is the hard one. Because if you don't have problems with any of that other stuff, unless you are incredibly unusual, you have some problems here. I know I do. Because I want my way. I want it in my time. I want that when it comes to God. I want that when it comes to you. And it's a struggle. And Paul says, before he ever starts talking about wives being submissive in the next verse, Paul says we are to submit to one another. And notice, by the way, the reason. Out of reverence for Christ. This is not the only reverence for Christ thing we did this morning. We submit to one another out of reverence for Christ in exercising control over what we do and how we do it. So this morning, are you walking in wisdom? Do you communicate in a way that's positive? Are you submitting to one another? Do you care about one another? Or are you walking in a different kind of way? Are you thankful for what God has done in your life? Or do you just think of all the things that you have accomplished? God wants us to walk not as unwise, but as wise. And the wisest thing you can do in your walk in life is to follow him. You can confess his name, take him on in baptism, and you can walk the new life, putting off the old self and being clothed in the newness of Christ. Or if you have walked away from that, you can make the wise choice of returning this morning. If there's some way we can help you in that way, or if you need the prayers of the church, please come while we stand and sing.